I started my career in the early 1980s at IBM as a software engineer, where compiling code for mainframes was a batch job. The transition from waiting an hour to see if your code compiled to everything now is very instant. And it always leads me to one of my favorite sayings is, now the technology is the easy part. The thing that people struggle with the most is change. And that's much harder than writing the code.
Some people are worried these days, right? Because some of these technologies seem so powerful that we are scared of our job. So as someone who have gone through all these cycles up and downs, how should we approach this?
It is just the nature of technology that it frightens people. And the first fear that people have is my livelihood. Is this going to take away my livelihood? And I'm still in the industry. So I'm an existence proof. I really do not think AI is going to destroy jobs. I see opportunities being created and people being given choices, which I think is hard. The hard part is the choice.
For people who are in the software development or software engineering career, right? Is there kind of timeless advice that you want to give?
Many of us are raised to think that your career is a ladder and you just keep going up, 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 up. I like to think of it as more of a canvas. When I was in college, my father told me, just work hard and you'll get ahead. As I've gone through my career, I know that was the correct first half of the equation, and I've added more to the end of the equation that I give to my children. I say,
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Tech Digital Podcast. Today I'm very excited. It's very rare for me to have a chance to talk to somebody who has like multi-years of experience, 40 plus years tech career and software engineering career. So I think today we are going to learn a lot from someone who have been in the industry for that long, and maybe we learn a little bit tips and trick how to be successful in the tech industry. So welcome Paula Paul to the podcast today.
Thank you, Henry. It's wonderful to be here.
Right. Paula, looking at your profile, I know there are so many things that we can dig into, but tell us a little bit more about yourself. Maybe if you can share a little bit of turning points that you think will be great for us to learn from.
Sure. And I think it is interesting to note that I've been a software engineer for many, many years. I started my career in the early 1980s at IBM as a software engineer, where compiling code for mainframes was a batch job. So, the transition from waiting an hour to see if your code compiled to everything now is very instant has been a really interesting perspective. And it always leads me to one of my favorite sayings is, now the technology is the easy part. We live in an abundance of compute and storage and network reach that wasn't available at the beginning of my career, which is, in some ways it's a long time, and in other ways it's not a long time. So I do expect that technology as an industry is always about change. And the thing that I find very interesting is the thing that people struggle with the most is change. So I work a lot with people on what is your relationship to technology, which often is about uncovering resistance to change or fear of change. And that's much harder than writing the code these days.
This episode is brought to you by Swimm.io, and I'm excited to have its CTO and co-founder, Omer Rosenbaum, with me today to tell you more about Swimm.
Hi Henry, very nice to meet you and thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more, what is Swimm.io?
At Swimm, we want to help companies understand their code bases. We combine static code analysis with generative AI to create comprehensive documents that help you navigate the code base. As an engineer myself, I wouldn't want engineers to spend so much time understanding existing code. I would want them to spend time creating and building new stuff. When you have code that has accumulated over decades, and especially in legacy languages that not many people are adapted nowadays, then the problem is even bigger.
Swimm.io is specializing into helping mainframe developers to understand their code base. Why mainframes?
We actually didn't start there. COBOL had been, by some people, obsolete for a few years. And I discovered that it's not really obsolete, not at all. There are more than 800 billion lines of COBOL code that are in production, and they drive lots of the business in the world. And we got more and more requests from customers to help them understand the legacy code bases that was written decades ago and accumulated over a very long period of time.
So from your customers so far, what are some of the success stories that you can share?
So we worked with an analyst who shared with us that it took them a year to document a single mainframe application, and using Swimm, they were able to document a similar application in a matter of hours. So saving that amount of time enables them to focus on other tasks.
Thanks, Omer, for sharing with us about Swimm today. To learn more about Swimm, check out their website at swimm.io. Right. As someone who have been around that long, right? So as you just shared just now, so you started your career by doing these kind of IBM mainframes, the punch cards. I really don't know what it looks like. And now to the era of, like cloud computing, mobile computing, and now even AI, right? So if you can share, maybe looking back with the pace of technology changes, what do you actually see and how do you actually reflect back to your early career? What can we software engineer appreciate a lot these days?
One of the things that I encourage people to do is really understand the meaning of the words that they're saying. We have a lot of terms that are very overloaded in technology, and AI has become that way now. When people are a little afraid of AI or is it going to take my job, I always go back to what are we using it for? I use a note taker, large language model, text summarization. So you could say it's an AI note taker. And I find that when I'm in a call or in a meeting, that has been saving me a lot of time. So if we just talk about what we're using large language models to do, it's much less scary and much more approachable. And we've been asking computers to generate outcomes for us for a long time. Even before my career, we've asked computers to generate outcomes. And I think the terminology around AI sometimes makes it less approachable than it needs to be.
Right. So I think that's pretty good call out, right? So we like to always refer multiple things using the same term and it gets overloaded. And, sometimes people even confuse that to some other meaning, right? So I think thanks for sharing that. Another thing that I picked from what you shared earlier, right? You mentioned in the very, very early of your career, compiling code takes a lot of hours, right? So the feedback loop seems to be really, really long. But I mean, if you look at it these days, I still think the feedback loop for software development cycle still considered long. So tell us why, even though the technology has changed so much, a lot of compute, a lot of power and all that, still the feedback loop cycle for software development is really long.
That's a great question. And it goes to what do we mean by the feedback loop? So the feedback loop of a compile is really to tell the software engineer, is there a syntax error in the code? It might not necessarily tell you if there's a logic error. So there's a feedback loop of syntax, and then there's a longer, I think there's always been a longer feedback loop for logic, or did you actually solve the right problem? So in my early career, I coded in assembly language and then a logic language that was proprietary to IBM called PLAS. We had to drop into assembly language in order to do the I/O because that made the code portable. Um, so so even though we were considering portability across different IBM operating systems, and we had a formal estimation cycle, and we typically spent only 25% of the product delivery cycle actually writing, compiling, and testing our code. So we did spend a lot more time upfront really understanding the problem. As software engineers, I worked in the manufacturing area in the early days of CAD or computer-aided design adoption. We really had to understand the problem well. And then we spent quite a lot of time in design and architecture before we would write code, doing a lot of work on paper. And then when we felt very confident and could talk about what we were going to build and how we were going to build it, then we would write the code. I had 8 people on one of my teams, and because your code is, you punch a compile and maybe you wait an hour, you're communicating with your teammates much more regularly. So I do think that while a lot of things have changed, some things have not. And agile approaches coming along are not so much changing the fact that we can get early feedback on syntax, longer feedback on logic and solution correctness, but we're breaking the solution into smaller pieces. So I would say that that's been an improvement, but it's always been a challenge to understand if you're really building the right thing, and the IDEs and rapid feedback from a instant compile of your code isn't necessarily telling you you're building the right thing.
Right. Building the right thing, it seems like the theme from many, many people I talk to, right? So because these days you can really code really fast, right? So you have a lot of technologies available out there, but seems like building the right thing, building the things right, also seems still like the problem that we have to solve, right? And you
Yeah.
mentioned that you spend just 25% of your time actually just to do the coding, the compiling and all that, and you spend quite a number of time doing the planning and maybe design upfront. Is it still the case that you think some kind of planning are still necessary while people are moving into more like, okay, let's do agile. We don't need upfront planning. We don't need upfront design and all that. So what's your take about all these, spending time to actually thinking what problems you're trying to solve and building things right?
I am a big fan of having a strategy. I think it's important to test hypotheses very early, which doesn't involve code. So if I wanna say I'd like to build a new home delivery app, having a hypothesis about that and then being able to reach people that you think might be good customers and testing your hypothesis, I think that's great. There's an old book called The Mythical Man Month, written by a person named Frederick Brooks, and he was somebody who worked at IBM on operating systems even before my time, certainly. And he had a vision and an essay called "There's No Silver Bullet," meaning there's no kind of brass ring that's gonna make us 10 times faster at doing what we're doing. He actually said that one of the things he had great hopes for was rapid prototyping. So rapid prototyping is awesome because it's a way to show people what you're thinking. I do think a lot of people are very visual thinkers, and if you want to test a hypothesis with them, you sort of have to show them what you're thinking, and I would say don't invest all of the software development time and effort in testing for the finished product, but find a way to demonstrate what you're thinking before you make those investments. So that's I like that shift in the industry. I did work at IBM. The process I described was really what we would call today a pure waterfall process, and it worked well in the manufacturing area because we did need things to be right by the time they were put into production, so there's no kinda crash and burn phase. But, there's different approaches to delivering products and to delivering software, and I'm very much a fan of testing hypotheses very early in the process.
Yeah, especially these days where people build a lot of new things, right? New startups, new ideas, new innovation, new disruption. Probably it's less difficult to actually plan. I think what you mentioned, doing the testing approach, right? Experiment, hypothesis, roll out prototypes, maybe MVP, what people call as well. So I think that will be still the go-to approach for software development these days. As someone who may have gone through a lot of, cool trends, fads, and maybe great technology that some people say will change the software engineering, the way software is being delivered, right? So be it, for example, the internet era, the web, mobile, cloud computing, and now AI. Some people are worried these days, right? Because some of these technologies seem so powerful that we are scared of our job. So as someone who have gone through all these cycles up and downs, maybe some learnings that you can share with us. How should we approach this?
Sure. I think it is just the nature of technology that it frightens people because it represents change in what we're doing or how we're doing it or how we experience things. And the first fear that people have is my livelihood. Is this going to take away my livelihood? And I'm still in the industry. So I am an existence proof. And so I do think even back in my first roles at IBM, it was during the adoption of computer-aided design software, and I had to show people who had been working on drafting boards how to use CAD systems, and their concern was, "Is this gonna take my job?" And I would say, "No, but if you like this kind of work in designing manufacturing parts or whatnot, you will have an opportunity to learn new ways of doing things. Some people like the opportunity to learn new ways of doing things, and some people really like the comfort of the way that they had been doing things. So that's the challenge. And I don't think the technology takes the jobs away. I think the people make choices. So it really is a choice. And I am very lucky because I've always been insatiably curious to learn new things. And if you take it all the way through I really do not think AI is going to destroy jobs. I think it's opening up tremendous opportunities to learn some new tools. And no matter what a large language model or other model produces as an outcome, you still need people to evaluate, is that what we really intended, or does that thing that was produced have value? So I don't really see jobs being destroyed. I see opportunities being created and people being given choices, which I think is hard. The hard part is the choice.
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging to hear from you, right? So all of us here could probably learn a thing or two just now what you mentioned, right? So first of all, change is always there, especially with technology. It could be really, really fast, really, really rapid, right? And it's, at the end of the day, it's the matter of choice. How do you want to go on board with the new technology, or do you resist and become obsolete? So I think it's also coming back to us whether we are curious to learn something that is new. And sometimes, yeah, we have to change our role, right? Change our skill set, but I think that is given in the technology world. For people who are in the software development or software engineering career, right? Is there any kind of timeless advice that you want to give for us so that we can focus on maybe the important stuff rather than following just the new trends all the time?
I have children, and when I was in college, my father told me, "Just work hard and you'll get ahead." As I've gone through my career, I know that was the correct first half of the equation, and I've added more to the end of the equation that I give to my children. I say, "Work hard at something you love, and then find people who appreciate you and that you will enjoy learning from." So I mentioned earlier that we live in an abundance of technology now compared to when I started. We have an abundance of compute. We have abundance of networking reach that is, the internet, and it's just amazing. Abundance of storage. Our whole lives could be recorded and kept in the cloud, it would have been unheard of when I first started. So you have an abundance of opportunity, and sometimes now the hardest part is choosing what you'd like to learn more about because there are so many opportunities. So my advice is find something that sparks your interest, that you're like, "Oh, that really gets me excited." Don't build a large language model because you think you have to, because everybody tells you it's the only way forward. Find something that you enjoy. Like, I enjoy music. Can I apply some of my skills to music? Can I learn some new skill that I could apply to music? So if you narrow your opportunities to the things that interest you and spark joy, I think you'll be much more successful, and you'll find it much easier to spend your time working hard at it. Don't worry if you're not out building large language models right now, but find a way to connect yourself through something you enjoy.
I like the second part of equation that you just mentioned, right? So find the work or the people that really appreciate you, right? So sometimes we work at some place where, it's more like a groundwork, not really we get appreciation, right? So I think it's really important not to just work hard and earn,
Mhm.
but also find something that appreciates back on what you're doing, right? So I think that's really key. And yeah, choosing the things that matter to you, I think still the hard part, because again, like you said, there's so many abundance. People maybe talk about different programming languages, different platforms, different whatever that is, right? Kubernetes itself has a lot of ecosystem in itself. So I know that you have spent a lot of your time as well, being a polyglot developers, trying multiple roles as well, not just software development, maybe in the product management, leadership and all that. How can we choose wisely? Because still, I think it's a challenge, and it is even more harder as I see going forward, right? Because there's so many choices, even more.
Yeah. Another really great question. I like to think of things in terms of architecture and strategy for your life and your career. And the definition of architecture, Grady Booch, is the significant design decisions that you make, where the significant design decisions are based on the ability to change your mind, basically. So as you go through life and you have all these options, things you could invest your time in to learn or study. It's kind of, to me, like going to a big restaurant where they have a big display case full of all the desserts, and I want them all. So, you can't in any one visit have all the desserts, but you could say, "Ooh, this chocolate cake. I'm gonna try the chocolate cake. What's the cost of changing my mind? Well, once I pay for it on this order, I'm gonna try the chocolate cake, but it's not gonna be my last meal." And your career is like that. Like, if you have an interest in it might be fun to be a product manager or a product owner. Don't be afraid to get involved in it and then change your mind and say, "No, maybe that's not exactly right. Let me try being more of a tech lead," or the other way around, or maybe I'm gonna try doing test automation. So I do think many of us are raised to think that your career is a ladder and you just keep going up, 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 up. I like to think of it as more of a canvas, that you have a paintbrush and you're just connecting the dots across the canvas, and it's a great picture. You get a very rich career that way. I also think that some people are afraid, if you've been in a hard engineering role, to step into product management. What if I forget how to code? I've never seen that happen. Never in my entire career. I've never seen anybody forget how to code. And the thing that you can tell yourself is you have already demonstrated to yourself that you are capable of learning. So no matter what dessert you try or where your paintbrush goes on the canvas, you can learn or relearn anything along the way if you decide that that really was the thing you'd like to do more.
Wow, I think this is a golden advice to me, right? So sometimes we are overthinking in a way, right? I also felt guilty in the past where I think always, your career has to be linear, right? You always have to step up either your role, your skill set, or whatever that is, right? But sometimes it's like what you said, right? You make decision, you want to try something, how hard it is to reverse. Some people call it the type 1, type 2, or two-way doors, one-way door kind of thing. And our career is kind of long, right? So I think our life, maybe we could easily spend like maybe 40 years kind of a career, right?
Right?
So taking 1 or 2
Yeah.
years in between just to learn something and figure it out whether it is meant for us is not really that long, right? Looking
Yeah.
in the bigger picture. So I think thanks for sharing this. For some of us who are still overthinking, so I think the key lesson here is, if it's not that difficult to reverse, just give it a try. So I really love that.
Yeah.
One of the things that you shared before we had this conversation as well, right? You're saying that every company used to be a tech company, but everyone is going to change into a SaaS company. So tell us, how do you come up with this kind of a thought process, and why do you think everyone should be a SaaS company now?
I think largely if you're depending on cloud services now for email or whatnot. So I think it goes back to what the company does to deliver value to its customers. So I work with lots of different companies. One recently was involved in the energy sector as a nonprofit to help organizations take advantage of more solar or natural energy or reduce their energy costs. So the value that that company exists for is to deliver those services and that value to their constituents. So you say, well, what truly custom software is needed to do that? And perhaps not that much now. We have really sophisticated CRM systems in the cloud that help with reaching your constituents and help with delivering value. So the core of most organizations these days can be represented in many of the large SaaS platforms. And I do think that custom software, if you separate it into customization of the platform versus truly unique custom work, the companies that are doing specific software products that are offering unique value, that's definitely not SaaS. But I'll bet those companies also rely on CRM systems for marketing and whatnot. I can't really think of a company a large company that doesn't rely on some kind of SaaS. And I think where companies are maybe erring on the side of too much custom software now, that they need to leverage their platform, whether that's maybe it's an in-house platform, even if it's a fully custom software product, you have an in-house team that's doing your DevOps platform or your delivery infrastructure. So I think that people need to really say, okay, how can I get the most out of my platform? And then what's the value add that I really need to invest in and focus on that's truly custom software or custom technology?
I think one fundamental things that I learned from my past guests as well in this era, right? So opening up your capability as an API, I think is also crucial, right? So to become like a SaaS, leveraging a SaaS, you need to have an API, right? Good, well-designed API that can collaborate with each other. I think this API economy is also kind of like important for many companies to adopt, right? And especially, I don't know whether this is going to be the trend going forward, right? We come to this agentic AI kind of trend where AI agents will talk to each other. So I think without good APIs available for them to talk to each other, I think it's going to be really difficult, right? So for people who build strategy for your tech, don't forget about this API economy aspect and how you think you can deliver your values through the API rather than always all the time through UI, the apps itself and things like that. I think that's really important. So Paula, as someone that are also active in the open source world, I know that you serve in the OpenJS Foundation and maybe a few other open source initiatives out there. What do you see the trends in open source these days?
Another great question. Even just in the past maybe 6 to 8 years, if you looked at any given software product, maybe the number of dependencies, maybe 500. And now if you look at any given software product, the dependencies on external software packages, maybe in the thousands typically. And 90% of that from the Linux Foundation, studies are that 90% of any given software product is open source packages. It's taken a long time for organizations to truly accept that fact. And I've worked not that long ago with organizations that say we don't do open source. And I would just say, well, let's look at some of your public websites or your internal software. And it's like, you're relying on it. What does it mean to do it? These days now, with the very visible kind of supply chain attack incidents and so forth, the awareness of open source has become much better. And I think organizations are now shifting into how do we really manage that? So I do see organizations really embracing the formation and staffing of OSPOs, open source program offices, that help really understand those dependencies, manage them well. My ideal is beyond awareness, then kind of managing it and optimizing it with things like OSPOs. Those organizations really learn how to contribute back to the ecosystem. In highly regulated industries, there are often a lot of barriers to contributing back to the open source ecosystem. And I think because so much value depends on the open source ecosystem, that every company should have an easy way to allow their employees to contribute back to the ecosystem. So we're getting there.
So for people who have ever analyzed your source code, right, how many packages and dependencies you're actually relying, I think, now probably in hundreds or thousands, not to mention, right, one dependency depends on other dependencies that come from open source, right? And I think if you imagine these days, we can run a web server just using one line or something like that, right? So just imagine how many dependencies that it has to pull in order to make that happen. So I think open source really becoming like a value adding. At the same time, you mentioned it could also be a risk for many companies because of the supply chain attack, right? And sometimes we don't know what software that gets pulled because we just know that our code runs. And we know in some news out there that there are, I don't know, some hackers out there who mimic a popular open source, try to change the name a little bit, and then it infiltrates some people's code base. How do you advise us to actually look at this problem? Is it something that we have to be really, really wary about? And what can we do to mitigate that?
Great question. I do think that if you are building software, product, custom software, knowing your dependencies is absolutely critical. And then evaluating, are you just pulling these software libraries into your product because it does a cool thing? Or did you really look at what this package does? Are there alternatives? How well supported is that package? I do tend to say, if a package is supported by a foundation like one of the Linux foundations, it has the backing of that foundation. Certainly the OpenJS Foundation is heavily involved in security and the security of the JavaScript ecosystem, which everyone depends upon. So I think looking for packages that are supported by healthy contributor communities and by foundations, if it's a large package like Node, that really puts a level of comfort behind the package. That means that it's going to be around. It's not a new concept, but there are organizations like Hero Devs, which is affiliated with the OpenJS Foundation, that will support packages that are out of the mainstream support. So if you have an old version of Node, but you still need a security patch, you can still get help. And looking for those kinds of things in the packages that you adopt is important.
As someone who is really active in the OpenJS Foundation, and we all know in JavaScript, right, the ecosystem is really, really thriving. There are so many open source software maybe being written as we speak, right? So tell us the kind of challenge that you have to deal with in order to, build this thriving, healthy community within the OpenJS ecosystem.
Well, I give a lot of credit to Robin Ginn, who's the executive director, and the entire board. It's really amazing because it's open governance of those JavaScript packages. Because if you say, well, if I've got a package or a library that really is only maintained by a large vendor, are you really going to get the fixes that you need in priority of your needs, or are you going to get fixes and things that you need in the order of the vendor's direction for the product? I really enjoy and admire championing open governance, which is something that the OpenJS Foundation does. It's not easy because you don't have the hierarchy of a large organization dictating terms from the top down. It really is a community. And that community takes care and feeding and a lot of really wonderful and dedicated people to move forward. So I give Robin Ginn a lot of credit for that, or all the credit for that. She's an amazing leader. So I think it does take good leadership and collaboration across a lot of very talented and wonderful individuals. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah, I would also like to express, appreciation, gratitude, kudos to those people who really, first of all, like contribute the open source project, right? That itself is kind of like voluntary basis, most of them, right? And for people who run this kind of a governance, especially for big ecosystems, the OpenJS, CNCF, and things like that, definitely it takes a lot of effort and complexities, especially governing people you don't work with really, really closely, right? Because people are distributed. So I think kudos and thank you for the hard work that you all contribute to the healthiness of this ecosystem. Apart from having more open source software being delivered, we also see some, especially big open source companies, pulling back from open source, either changing license, make it less permissive, and things like that. Some popular examples could be like Terraform with OpenTofu, maybe Redis as well. Now there's a Valkey. So maybe tell us a little bit, what was your view about some of these trends? Are you worried or concerned about open source maybe not going to become profitable? Maybe that's one aspect that people see, right? Because these companies tend to want to make profit as they go larger. And will it be something that we can still change, to have more open source thriving?
Yeah, I don't think open source is going away. I think actually open source is becoming stronger. And if you look at things like OpenTofu as a reaction to, sometimes it's called the rug pull, the license change, the community immediately reacted and forked what was available within a week. I think it was submitted to the Linux Foundation as a new foundation, embraced by the Linux Foundation. I was at a conference where it was announced, and we had a very large insurance company come up on stage and say, they were moving from the commercial product to the open source product because they embraced open source. I think that is a really good example of the influence of community, and people may not want to be tied to an organization that is driven by private equity pressure for profit causing these kinds of licensing changes. I think if you bring a library or a product to open source and you license it under a permissive license, I would rather that be a lifelong commitment. And it sort of is, because the moment that you publish a version under that permissive license, that's out there. It's in the ecosystem. People can fork it. I suppose you could delete the repository, but there's copies of things everywhere. I don't really think these licensing changes are very effective, and certainly the Terraform licensing change did not have the desired result. It created a competitor, OpenTofu. I think that should be maybe a cautionary tale for companies thinking that they should do a rug pull like that, that are they really just going to create a competitor?
And for us, many developers who are relying on this software, do you advise us? I know maybe this is a hard advice to give, but do you advise us to always opt for the open source software rather than the commercial version of the software? Or there's
Oh,
a little bit of a thinking process that you should take. Maybe some advice here.
yeah, yeah, no, I have friends, a really wonderful friend of mine, Michele Riva. When we were working together, he had an idea for a product, and he had and has a strategy that there would always be a core that would not be open, and that would be part of his value add as a creator, but that all of the infrastructure around that product would be open source. So that was his strategy from the beginning. And so that strategy is open. People know that that's the strategy, and then they have a choice. If you, as an engineer or developer, are using an open source package, I think there is an assumption that I should always be able to keep using that package. I don't really feel that it's full of integrity to change the licensing like that when there are so many people depending on it as an open source package. But that doesn't mean that there would never be closed source products. I'm really opposed to doing what's called the rug pull, is changing the licensing after it's out there and in the community.
Maybe there's another trend these days as well related to open source, right? Is the AI actually training their model using these open source software that are publicly available, right? And they are permissive and make it their own, like training the model, giving people suggestions and building software on top of that. Sometimes the license probably is not evident, right? From the
Mhm.
suggestion that the AI gives. So what is your take about this? Is this a threat to open source?
I think it's certainly a challenge. I do think that a lot of the way that models are trained is not well governed. If I train an AI model on, say, 10 different open source packages, but those open source packages all have different licenses, like MIT, that's a challenge. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, but I think that the outcome prompts from that model, I'm a little concerned about that, but it's also, I fully admit that it's a very hard problem to solve right now. Say if you generate code from models that are trained on open source, I would really try to understand as best as possible the licensing implications. And that's where, again, if you use software that is supported by foundations, one of the functions that a foundation provides is legal. The OpenJS Foundation has very wonderful experienced legal support that understands licensing and more, trademarks and all the things that are important to software. So I would say don't be afraid to ask, and especially in these public channels or GitHub comments or whatnot, is like, I'm going to generate a product from this. What license should I use? And I think that that's going to spark some very interesting conversation.
For someone who is really new, like I'm a newbie in all this licensing and understanding licenses and things like that, right? Especially with, let's say, if I use a lot of AI suggests me a lot of things. There are maybe code that are already blended, right? So like multiple open source being blended together. You mentioned about legal, right? How can we actually first identify, okay, if this is a legal issue, or should we actually be actively asking somebody to actually check our code? Like, what should someone who don't really have any good understanding about these legal implications
It's interesting because you would say, okay, everything's on the internet and I'm a software engineer, the world is mine. And I think in general, things don't get messy until maybe you have your product goes viral. So it doesn't cost anything to say, what would happen if my product went viral and then say, well, what software am I depending on? And maybe the simplest question is which of the packages that I depend on have permissive licenses, meaning free to do whatever you would like with this code. Maybe you have to have attribution. You would say, I use these libraries or that's listed in my package file or my, software bill of materials. If you come across a package or a closed source product that you depend on, that's the thing that you would want to make a special note of. Okay, what would happen if I really got popular, went viral, started to make a lot of income? Who might claim some of that success that I had? And largely, I
Yeah.
like to think that most of the open source that I use is permissive license. But if I ever really got serious or went to market with a product, I'd have a serious look at all my dependencies.
So I think some people maybe know this term software bill of materials, right? So maybe if you can produce that BOM, right, BOM as part of your CI/CD process, maybe you can really understand what kind of dependencies, and maybe they will also tell you what kind of licenses. Maybe there's a detection of license change.
Yep.
And I really believe maybe sometime in the near future we will see some tools that can, analyze patterns of your code and check it against maybe some of the open source software and see if there's any kind of resemblance, how much percentage is it the same, and you should be worried about, if let's say it's 90% plus, right? So maybe you would have
Yeah.
some challenges in terms of managing those. So I think thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. Apart from being active in open source, one thing that you are also active in is actually the women in technology aspect, the diversity and inclusion. So I know what is happening these days in United States can be quite concerning for some people, like big tech companies pulling back, their DEI efforts, some even stop it. So maybe as someone who lived there, I may not follow all the news about all these DEI, but maybe tell us what you see and what you observe back there.
Yeah, I think that, with news, there's signal and noise, and certainly there is a lot of noise around DEI, and it's just become this buzzword now that you blame everything on DEI. The fact of the matter in the United States, I spoke at a conference for women in tech not that long ago, and I said the encouraging thing in the United States as far as women's participation or people who identify as female, more than half of the people getting college degrees identify as female. So that trend has been continuing for some years now. Again, because I've been in the industry for so long, it's easier for me to take a long-term view. I do think that education is so important, and people who identify as female are pursuing their educations more and more now, and more so than men of the same age, which is a different concern. But these things are going to take time. I'll go back to, my father told me just work hard and you'll get ahead. And that's only one half of the equation. I do think that everyone needs a strategy for their career and not be afraid to try things. And then maybe the most important part is don't get stuck somewhere that doesn't appreciate you. You don't enjoy working with the people or you stopped getting opportunities to learn. Those things are all self-directed. I wrote a piece recently that, there's really no such thing as a meritocracy, even in companies that claim that it's a meritocracy. There's no such thing as a meritocracy because, to have a meritocracy, you'd have to have agreed skills. You'd have to have agreed definitions of those skills, agreed ways to measure them, and agreed ways for people to judge them. And that's a very challenging thing because people are involved. And even standardized tests have bias in the way that questions are written. So I would say, don't get hung up waiting for some magical meritocracy to reward you, and pursue the things that you're interested in and want to invest your time and effort in learning, and then find your tribe, find your people. So those, I kind of stay away from the DEI aspect of that and try to have it as more of your personal strategy for your life and your career.
Yeah. So I think that's really encouraging, right? So still focus on the education aspect, no matter whether you are part from of the minority, maybe women, right, or whatever that is. Maybe
Yeah,
this is just a phase of time as well, right? So just don't give up, right? So invest in the
yeah,
education. I think that's really cool thing. And for people who are in the leadership or some companies, because the big tech, maybe the United States government as well, set precedents, right? Do you think that many people will just follow, right? And what's your take here for companies who are maybe in between? Should I follow, should I not follow, should I change my program and things like that? Or maybe for leaders as well, they used to be championing DI, and maybe now they are maybe in the wrong side of things. What would be
yeah.
your advice for these leaders out there?
Well, don't throw out the value of the signal because of the noise. And to me now, DEI has become like AI. It's just this overloaded term. And all of the studies throughout the past decades have demonstrated that having different kinds of people on boards, people with different kinds of thought processes and people with different opinions and leadership, those companies produce more revenue. It's just a fact. So if you go back to your strategy as a company, if you want to optimize your performance as a company, optimize your revenue, maximize your opportunity and maximize your revenue, having different kinds of people in leadership and different kinds of opinions surrounding you and the ability to collaborate, it's like a gold mine. So you can walk away from the gold mine because of the noise in the press. Personally, I think that especially given we have more diverse people getting their education, this too shall pass, that the noise will go away and the value of the signal will remain. But I can
Yeah.
appreciate that for someone who is young right now, and I imagine that it is challenging, and I know my own children are in their 20s, so it's just a challenging time for young people.
Yeah, so for those young people, right, especially, for example, the women who want to think taking computer science or software engineering role, looking at this trend, maybe they hesitate. I think the key message still here, if you are passionate about it, if you're keen to learn about it, right, I think you should still proceed. Maybe in the US, it's starting, right? But I don't see any other parts of the world actually following suit. Maybe there's still hope, right? Don't be disheartened. So I think there are still many opportunities. And besides, some people are scared about AI taking over the job. I see AI actually is very empowering for people to get started into this world, right? Software engineering and all that, because it can really kickstart your learning development really, really fast. And I personally
Yeah.
myself learn quite a lot of things from AI these days, especially if you want to learn new tech, new languages,
Yeah.
solve new problems and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I agree. I love that it's integrated in search and you can just ask a natural language question, "Tell me more about this," and it will summarize what it finds on the internet, and you can evaluate that and ask different kinds of questions to see if you get a different answer. I think it's amazing. I love it.
yeah, so I think this curiosity, right, asking AI multiple times, multiple stages, right? I think it will really gives you so much knowledge. Of course, you need to fact check. Sometimes they hallucinate and give you wrong answer, but still, for most common knowledge out there, I think that would give you like a good information that you can learn from, right? So I think that's really superpower to me. So again, for those of you who think software engineering might be in a gloomy days, so I think there's still hope that it can become like a great career. So one
It
other
is.
aspect that I see about you in your LinkedIn profile, you mentioned that you are helping people to create healthy relationship with technology. I'm just curious, what aspect do you see that the relationship within maybe human and technology are not healthy?
That's another really great question, and I would start with if you're working with a leadership team, technology leadership team or an executive team, and it's not uncommon to find people on those teams that will say or anyone that might say, "Oh, I'm not technical." Then I would dig into that statement because, what are they really saying? That is a description of their relationship to technology. They're saying, "I'm not technical." Anyone who has a phone or uses a computer or listens to media or, reads is interacting with technology. So to say I'm not technical is a very odd statement for me to hear. And I think what people might really be saying is, I'm overwhelmed by how much I'm going to have to learn, or I know this is going to impact my organization, but I'm not sure what to do about that. Those are very different things than saying I'm not technical. So I think the other statements will open up conversations. And many times, what I'll start with in organizations is, well, how do you make decisions about technology? And that goes to architecture, right? And it's like cost of change. How can we make a decision that advances value to our business or from our business in a small way so we can learn from that and then either change our mind or make another decision to advance it. And I think those kinds of decision-making skills need some work in many organizations, that if you're just making decisions based on, what a vendor tells you or what you read in the noise, at some conference or some trade show, helping people understand how to make healthy decisions about technology is like helping them make healthy decisions about what they eat. Very similar, but people don't tend to think of technology that way. So I do try to borrow from these other disciplines like relationship therapy or nutrition therapy, and you can really apply a lot of those things to how people react to, make decisions about, and adopt technology.
Right. When you mentioned about overwhelm, I can really empathize for some people. Like imagine it for us, software engineers who are in this world, right? Sometimes we are really also overwhelmed by the amount of technology advancement. So I could empathize people who are not even in this world, seeing the progress, the advancement out there. They could really, really become super overwhelmed, I guess, right? So
Yeah,
maybe for some of
yeah,
those who listen to this episode as well. So what's your tips for them, because they are not in this world? They see a lot of changes coming. They are
yeah.
like kind of stuck. Some of them resist the change, but maybe is there any tips from you?
Yeah, and these are natural. It's anxiety, right? It's like I'm in my company and all of these I hear all these things in the media, AI, and it's gonna take over the world, it might take over my company. So there's anxiety, and I do think that it's important to take a breath, look at your own organization, and also many times people don't have a good idea of exactly what's going on in their own organization. So I start with, what's your inventory? And then things like yoga, you might do a body scan head to toe. It's valuable in organizations. It's like, what is going on in your organization? You don't have to take months and months. You can, make some inventory. A lot of times, especially in technology, there's a very sprawling inventory and it's like not all tied to core value streams. So there's a lot of steps that you can do that are just about becoming aware of exactly where you are and what's your technology stance. No need to be anxious about that. And then you can start to say, are there places, simple things. Should we have a policy that allows our employees to use a large language model note taker in meetings? Should we summarize our company videos through a large language model and make those available to people who can't join? Little baby steps that are decisions you can make that are easily reversible, and then just start to give you more comfort with the big, scary, AI thing. There's just a lot of anxiety, which is unfortunate, and I think those are the things that are easily addressed. More strategic things like, should we be putting AI into our call center? Those are really great questions, and I would just make a big list of them and then grow some more robust decision-making skills about what should we do a pilot of or what should we experiment with and learn from. So, I mean, those things really have not changed as good things to do in general, but when a new fad comes out, like blockchain, this kinda happened during the blockchain era, and then again with AI, it's like getting back to some basics can help avoid a lot of anxiety.
I really love again your advice there. Instead of being anxious about all these change and resist, right? I think always maybe, I don't know, step your foot on the ground, right? So scan your organization, scan yourself, do inventory checking, And I think I heard this before as well. Before you make any good change, you actually need to be aware first, right? So if we are not aware, maybe we are taking wrong decision, right? So always look back, what is happening around you, what are the opportunities? Because in any kind of risk, any kind of whatever disruption, that there's always opportunity. And if you can spot that, probably that will also give you a big opportunity to actually advance in your career and in your role, right? So I think that's a very good tips. So, Paula, it's been a great conversation. As we wrap up our conversation, right, I normally ask my guests to share what I call the 3 technical leadership wisdom. So maybe if you can think of it just like advice that you want to give to the listeners, maybe if you can share your version of the 3 technical leadership wisdom.
In technical leadership, there is the mechanic part, right? The mechanics of the technology. And I would say don't get overwhelmed because we live in an abundance of technology. Anything that you can dream of that you would like to do with compute network storage, I think is possible now, given the right resources, time, this kind of thing. So I would say don't get overwhelmed trying to understand everything that's available, and start to understand the value that your organization delivers to its community or its constituents, customers, and how you can use this kind of vast abundance of technology we have available to make some small steps. I would also say if you ever start to feel that it's not fun anymore, do the body scan. It's like, what am I really thinking? Why am I really not happy anymore? Sometimes I've just taken a break and gone back and written like little Ruby programs or Ruby on Rails and reconnect with the things that you enjoy, because that will make you a better leader. And then maybe most of all is if you are grounded as a technical leader, the best thing you can do is help your team, the people who work for you, report to you, and your peers have a better relationship with technology, and to maybe spark some of the joy that you get from it in those other people and spread the love. So those would be my pieces of advice.
All right. So thanks for sharing them. I think I really love the part where you ask us to actually do the body scan, right? So taking awareness, I think that's always important in any kind of rapid changes, disruptions, and things like that. You don't want to get lost in all this disruption, right? So yeah, taking a break is also a great thing, right? Sometimes you don't always have to force yourself, but taking a break, I think again, like if you look at the bigger picture, right? This is maybe just a point in time, and you should not be, disheartened because of this. So maybe for people who love this conversation, they want to ask you more questions, they want to follow you. Is there a place where they can find you online?
Sure, there are a couple. On LinkedIn, I'm in WAC Paula Paul, so it's easy to find. And then I do write on Medium. And then if there are people interested in an engagement or consulting engagement, I work through my own company, which is Greyshore, or GREYSHORE.com. So I'm always happy to talk, Peter, just in general, meeting people and talking about technology. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. It's been fun.
I would also acknowledge your effort, your contribution in the community, right? Be it the OpenJS Foundation, be it the Women in Tech and all that. And again, I really appreciate your time, having to share some of these wisdom for us. Again, it's a rare opportunity for me to learn from someone who has been there, in the tech industry since the very long. So again, I appreciate your time and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.